Eleanor Weiss had lived in her Upper West Side apartment long enough to forget what silence used to feel like. For decades, silence had been her companion, comfortable, predictable, earned. It arrived every morning with her coffee and stayed through the afternoon as sunlight slid across the hardwood floors. It settled in at night when she turned on the television, turned the volume up just enough, and let old courtroom dramas play while the city murmured outside her windows. At 70 years old, Eleanor wasn't fragile, and she certainly wasn't confused. She was a widow, yes, but she was also a woman who had paid off her co-op apartment years earlier, memorized the bylaws, tipped the building staff generously, and learned the rhythms of New York the way some people learned prayer. Her apartment on West 86th Street was rent-stabilized, protected, and entirely hers. She owned it outright. That fact mattered to her, not because she bragged about it, but because it represented something solid in a city that constantly tried to move you along. When her husband died 12 years earlier, friends worried she'd be lonely. Eleanor surprised them. She filled her days with routine. She knew the diner waitress by name, argued politics with the pharmacist, and never missed an episode of Matlock. She liked things orderly. She liked knowing where her keys were. She liked that no one told her when to go to bed. Then her son called. David sounded tired, which immediately put Eleanor on edge. Her son had always been tired when he wanted something. He talked about layoffs, bad timing, a mortgage that suddenly felt heavier than expected. He said it was temporary. Everything was temporary, he assured her. Just until things stabilized. Melissa, he added gently, was stressed. Noah needed space. They just needed a little help. Eleanor hesitated longer than David expected. She asked questions. How long? Where would they sleep? What were the rules? David laughed nervously and said they'd figure it out. They always did. She agreed because she was a mother, because she still remembered David at 6 years old clutching her hand crossing Broadway, because saying no felt heavier than opening her door. They arrived on a Sunday afternoon with suitcases that suggested this would not be brief. Melissa entered first, scanning the apartment the way hotel guests do, evaluating, noting flaws, mentally rearranging. Noah followed, eyes glued to his phone, barely acknowledging his grandmother before dropping his backpack onto the couch. David hovered, apologetic, already shrinking. At first, Eleanor tried to adapt. She moved her sewing supplies out of the second bedroom. She cooked meals big enough for 4. She lowered the television volume at night even though her hearing wasn't what it used to be. She told herself this was what families did. But the tone shifted quickly. Melissa worked from home and claimed the dining table as her office. She complained about Eleanor's routines, about the smell of coffee in the morning, about the noise of the television in the afternoon. She asked Eleanor to use headphones. She suggested Eleanor nap more, rest her eyes, maybe watch something quieter. One evening, Eleanor was watching Matlock when Melissa walked into the living room, remote already in hand. "Could you go to bed?" she said, not unkindly but not politely either. "We need the living room for family time." Eleanor stared at her, confused by the ease with which Melissa spoke those words, by how naturally she excluded her from her own space. She went to her bedroom that night without arguing. She lay awake listening to laughter that didn't include her. The apartment changed. Shoes were left in the hallway. Dirty dishes lingered. Noah sprawled across the couch as if it belonged to him, his voice rising during video games, his feet resting on Eleanor's coffee table. David apologized constantly, which somehow made Eleanor feel smaller. The breaking point didn't arrive in a dramatic explosion. It came quietly, on a Tuesday morning, when Eleanor stepped into the hallway and found 2 strangers standing near her door with rolling suitcases. They looked uncertain, young, polite in the way people are when they don't know the rules of a place yet. Melissa appeared behind them, smiling brightly, keys in her hand. "You'll love it here," she said. "The neighborhood is amazing." Eleanor said nothing. She waited. A few days later, it happened again. Different people. Same suitcases. Same keys. Eleanor began to pay attention. She watched patterns. She listened. She noticed unfamiliar faces in the elevator, people who didn't nod the way residents did. That night, she took out her co-op documents. She read them slowly, carefully, her finger tracing lines she'd skimmed years ago. No subletting. No short-term rentals. No unapproved occupants beyond a limited time frame. The rules were clear. They always had been. She didn't confront David. She didn't accuse Melissa. She didn't cry. She called Harold Feldman. Mr. Feldman had been the building's attorney longer than Eleanor had lived there. His voice was calm, professional, unsurprised. He listened while she explained everything, occasionally humming an acknowledgement. "This is illegal," he said simply. "And you're well within your rights." "Their family," Eleanor said, more to herself than to him. "Family doesn't override housing law," he replied. "And the board will support you." He outlined the steps. Documentation. Notices. Board approval. Eviction proceedings if necessary. It all sounded clinical, distant, but Eleanor felt something inside her settle. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. "Proceed quietly," she said. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor became meticulous. She moved her jewelry, documents, photographs, and anything she couldn't replace into a small storage unit nearby. She labeled boxes neatly. She kept receipts. She smiled politely at dinner while Melissa talked about how expensive New York was, how hard it was to survive. She tipped the doorman generously, the way she always had, just a little more often. They exchanged looks but no words. In buildings like this, understanding didn't require explanation. When the certified letters arrived, Melissa exploded. She accused Eleanor of betrayal, of cruelty, of abandoning her own family. David begged. He said they just needed more time. He said Eleanor didn't understand how hard things were. "I understand perfectly," Eleanor said. "That's why I followed the rules." They didn't leave. They assumed she wouldn't follow through. They assumed her age made her weak. On the morning the sheriff arrived, Eleanor put on her good coat and walked to her favorite diner. She ordered coffee and eggs and sat by the window. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Inside, Eleanor felt calm. She returned to a silent apartment. No shoes. No voices. No clutter. The air felt lighter, like it had exhaled. Eleanor picked up the remote, sat in her chair, and turned the television up as loud as she wanted. For the first time in months, the apartment was hers again. And that was enough.